variety of ways. First, through the 12 Steps program, then also through group homes for the developmentally disabled. In 2006, Matt started his own tattoo shop named Sacred Heart Tattoo and apprenticed other tattoo artists, and through that work led many men to enter the Catholic Church. Matt also served for 2 years as a Focus missionary, and after leaving Focus, he made the 19th annotation of the Spiritual Exercises of St. Ignatius, where he received the call to found Sacred Heart Ministries and serves with that ministry presently. He lives in Lincoln with his wife Demetra and 3 children.
Yep, 3 and 1 on the way.
3 children and 1 on the way. So please welcome to the podium Matt Simmons.
Let's start with a prayer. In the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Father, thank you for this opportunity to be together this evening. Please pour your Holy Spirit on us. Open our hearts to be receptive to your love, to your presence. Please help us to be concerned with what you're saying to each of us individually. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, so Justin told you about me. Many times people wonder how the freaky, weird tattooed guy gets asked to do stuff like this. And it's 2 things, I think. One, God has a sense of humor, and Bishop Conley has a lot of faith in God. So I've been given a lot of grace to be where I'm at today. And it's always amazing to me when I get asked to do things like this, because there was points in my life where nobody really wanted me around or a part of anything, because I did not live a good life for many, many years. So tonight I was asked to talk a little bit about my story and then prayer. And I'm going to weave them together at some level here, because prayer is in essence a relationship with God, is simply put. It's a relationship. It's a relationship in which we dialogue back and forth. It's a relationship where we give and receive. And the relationships are difficult, right? They're really difficult, and they're really powerful both, because you have to change to be in them. You cannot remain the same and be in a relationship with another person, right? Relationships come about because 2 people choose to be together. That's it. When the minute you stop choosing is the minute somebody departs or it falls apart and everything goes away. Anybody who's been married for longer than 5 minutes knows you have to choose to be together sometimes. It's not always easy, right? There's a reason there's a vow there, right? Because sometimes in some situations, in some marriages, that's what holds it together, right? And so it's about relationship. That's what prayer is. It's how do you stay in relationship, right? God totally gave himself to us. He totally conformed himself to us by becoming one of us through the incarnation. And prayer, he's always seeking after us, the Catechism says. It's always his effort first. And our prayer is always a response to his invitation. And so our end of prayer is really repenting, right, which is turning back around towards him, face him, because it's hard to be in a relationship when you have your back to somebody, right? If you think talking to somebody with your back to you, it's awkward, to say the least. Well, it's no different with God. If we've turned away from him, then we need to repent and turn back and be in relationship. So it's our response to this invitation that he brings, which is, I'm here, I'm present. That's what this season is all about, leading up to. He's present in everything. He never leaves. He never moves. He's fully surrendered, and he's fully vulnerable all the time. Fully surrendered and fully vulnerable. Right? And so he's conformed himself to us, and he's waiting there patiently, inviting, knocking at the door, doom, 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 waiting for us to open it ever so slightly so we can be in communion with him. Right? And so prayer is our response to that. It's when we turn back and we open up in a vulnerable way as well, and we surrender to the love that we need, which is the deepest desire of every human heart, right? Is this communion with the other, God and the other, both. It's not good for us to be alone, right? And so that's what prayer is. It's this relationship. It's how that works. So my story ruptured all of that for me. My foundation was completely washed out as far as relationship goes. So grace builds upon nature, Aquinas says. So our family is our natural foundation to our relationship with God. Man and woman, I created them. In my image, I created them. So man and woman together make up the image of God. It's not one of us only, it's both. And you see all throughout Scripture how God has seemingly both attributes. Sometimes he's this strong, organized, focused, protective person. Sometimes he's this mother hen who will never forget anybody, just like a mother would never forget their child. But even if she forgets you, he will never forget you, right? Sometimes he's this great compassionate, right? And so God is not either man or woman. God is God, right? He's separate from us. He's different. He's God. He's Father because he's generative, right? Begotten from the Father, proceeds from the Father. He's generative. Men are generative, right? So the grace builds upon nature. And so the idea in the perfect world would be we'd have perfect parents that were amazing saints. And they loved us totally. They didn't have faults of their own. They didn't fall short or accidentally hurt us or purposely, intentionally hurt us. And we would learn this loving trust and vulnerability and surrender to them and their guidance and obedience. And obedience is just listening, right? Obedience is listening. St. Benedict would say immediate listening. Boom, no hesitation. That's what obedience is. That's what he calls monks to, is this immediate listening. And what we're listening for, we're listening to God in the individual. Be it our spouse, our priest, our bishop, our boss, right? That's what we're listening for. And so if we grow up in this perfect situation where we have great, amazing parents and we're taught to listen for God through them, and we build this life with them, or they build a life with us, where we're dependent upon them, as we age, when we hit that age of 18, 20, 22, 24, whatever it is, whenever we mature, maybe it's 30 or 35 for some of us, right? We would pass off smoothly from the hands of our parents into the hands of God, and we'd sail off to heaven and we become saints, right? The reality is most of us don't live in that situation, and neither did I. And so this foundation wasn't really there. My family, my parents split when I was 3 and they divorced when I was 5. And I don't remember my parents together at all. My mom was severely mentally ill. She had bipolar disorder and schizoaffective disorder, which basically meant she was bipolar and delusional, right? And she was on and off medication for 20 years and was never really around. And when she was around, she was so unpredictable and back and forth that it was just very difficult. There was no stability there with her. My father is the one who raised me, and I have a sister who's 7 years older than me. My father was born in 1940 and was born in Scottsbluff and came from out there in a very traditional family. And, mom stayed home, raised the kids, he worked, So all that fell to my sister, right? And my dad really wasn't around much. He worked hard and he provided everything we needed. We had money, all those kind of things. Didn't have to worry about any of that stuff. But I never spent time with my father. Rarely did I spend time with him. And he didn't disciple me. He didn't teach me how to do things. He didn't teach me how to do anything in life, really. So all my family can build houses from the ground up without even a second thought. Like my cousin, him and my uncle ripped apart the truck in high school and rebuilt it in a couple months. They all remodel their houses, I don't know how to do anything. Nothing. Right? Because my father never took the time with me to shape me and mold me. I have aptitudes for it, so when I do it, it takes me about one time to learn and I'm fine. But I was never taught. I never had that interaction. So my sister was the one who basically raised me. And she loved me and did the best she could, but quite frankly, what teenage girl wants to raise their kid brother? They want to be out hanging out with friends and doing what teenage girls do, right? But she wasn't able to. She had me. And she had to run me around everywhere, take me to school, pick me up, take me to do other things, the list goes on. And she did not like it, and it was abundantly clear. Not to mention, when my parents split, it was right after I came. Well, my mother's postpartum depression kicked off my mom's mental illness. And I confirmed this later with my sister, because in the exercises when I was doing them, one of the beautiful things about that retreat is that it begins to retool our history. We begin to see things from God's perspective instead of our own limited perspective. And one of the things that came out of that was that I always in my life felt like everything was my fault, like I was bad, like there was something wrong with me. Part of it was because no one ever interacted with me. But big part of it was my sister. And in a 7-year-old girl's mind, this little kid comes and destroys her family. Mom's never the same. Family splits apart. And it made complete sense out of how she treated me. And there's a lot of unpleasant things involved with that. Verbal, sometimes physical, things like that. Today we have a good relationship, a very good relationship. But at the time it was really difficult. And so growing up, what my experience was that nobody wanted me. I wasn't worth taking any time with. And I was bad. I was a problem. My very being was destructive, right? And nobody changed that. Nobody stepped in to reverse that for me. And people ask me sometimes, they're like, well, what could have been different? And I don't know. I mean, it's not like anybody could have just walked in with a magic pixie dust and been like, and everything would have been fine, right? I was walking out of that with some wounds. However, I have had four pastors in my family. I'm a convert, but 4 pastors. Two or three of them were Methodist pastors, and I'm not sure what the other ones were. All of them were Christian, all of them devout, yet nobody lifted a finger to enter into my family. Nobody paid attention to what was going on and interacted, right? There were people in my life that could have done something. Christians in my life who could have done something. And it's interesting, a lot of people, I do this Unbound ministry where it's a deliverance ministry, and there's a lot of people who have a lot of stuff, right? And they bring it up and they bring it forward because Jesus actually wants to heal us. He wants to change us into a new creation, right? He doesn't want to just paint us with holiness and then we go about living life as we did before and we're on our way into heaven, right? It's not that. We aren't covered with a blanket of grace. He wants to fundamentally transfigure us, transform us, and make us new. And he also doesn't just want us to get to par, right? That's what the world wants. They just hope we get to par so we can contribute to society, right? Jesus works in the Sermon on the Mount, which is like way out here somewhere. If you even look at your brother with anger, you're already in trouble. Right? And that's not just some mythological thing, like some fanciful idea. That's what he wants. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Perfect in love, perfect in forgiveness. That's what the saints are. Right? They hit that. That's where they live, is in the Sermon on the Mount. And our call and what these saints do is they manifest Jesus to the world. Mother Teresa is my personal favorite because she touched me. And I'll get to her in a minute. But there's a story, one in particular. There's a book by Father Leo Massberg, I believe, is the priest. And it's a collection of stories when he ran around with Mother Teresa. And it's awesome. There's some crazy stuff in there. Like, She told him he was going to go up and see Pope John Paul II. And he's like, I don't, you know. She got him in. Passed the Swiss Guard, right? Got him in. And then he can celebrate in Mass with John Paul II. To boot. And this dude's just driving her around, you know, being the usher. And, but anyway, so she's walking down the street in like New York or something like that, and she walks by a homeless person who's blind, which she often did, reached down, talked to him for a minute. And they looked up and they said, Jesus, is that you? That's what it means to be a Christian, a Christian, a Christ follower. We're supposed to be in his likeness. In the Father's, we're all in his image already, right? Because we all have reason, we all have will, we have all these things. But we're supposed to be in his likeness. We're supposed to look like him. That prayer spread his fragrance everywhere we go, right? Cardinal Newman, I believe, Mother Teresa prayed it all the time. That's who we're supposed to be. People are supposed to eat of the fruits of the Spirit that drip off of us. We're supposed to be filled with the Spirit in such a way that we're that tree that drops those fruits everywhere we go. And people come to us for spiritual nourishment. And when they interact with us, they're eating of those fruits. Peace, joy, patience, kindness, all those fruits. Right? And they get nourished. That's who we're supposed to be. Had I encountered that at some point in my life growing up, it might have been different. Right? On a regular basis. Not just once, but on a regular basis. And so I grew up alone, I grew up isolated, and I grew up questioning and afraid. I was a freaked out little kid, man. Like I was always afraid, just totally amped up, afraid. My mom lived in Omaha, I lived in Lincoln, and I'd go up to Omaha and I hated Omaha. Still don't particularly care for it all that much. It's got a lot of problems. It's a big city, and it's got big city problems, you know. But growing up, I really didn't like it a lot at all. And Lincoln was a lot different back then, 30, 35 years ago. It was different than it is today. And I'd be freaked out going up there, and I just had this fear. And I got baptized when I was 10, in 1987, in Bellevue at a Protestant Charismatic Assemblies of God church. Just drove past it the other day, actually. My wife and I were up there with our family at the zoo, and we're coming home and cut through Bellevue. Anyway, drove past there. And I remember that when they made an altar call, my mom told me that they made an altar call, and she looked down, and I was gone, and I was running up the side, right? And I remember being baptized, and I remember after that experiencing God. I remember him being there. I remember having a peace. I remember that. I remember the only reason I remember drawing pictures for her of Jesus-y stuff was because she made a photo album of me years later of all these things that I had done growing up, and it was in there. I was like, oh, wow. And I was really annoyed at myself, actually, because I did not like Jesus-y people at all. At all. I did not like Christians, particularly not the Jesus-drippy ones that always talked about him, right? And so I saw that. I remember one time going to a Christian concert at the Omaha Civic Auditorium, and I remember walking from there to her car, which was probably like 6 blocks through downtown, and I remember having zero fear and absolute peace, and I'd never experienced that in my life. I was probably 10 or 11 years old. And shortly after that, my mom freaked out. My sister lived with her for a period of time, and she committed my sister to a mental hospital, then committed herself, all after hiding me, kidnapping me, and hiding me with a family in Bellevue, right? Took my dad some time to get my sister out, to find me, and it was just a big mess. After that, I was a mess. I was an absolute mess, because I wasn't allowed to see her anymore, and it was just rough, right? And I remember Sunday nights were horrible, because I'd go see her on Friday, and I'd come home Sunday. And Sunday nights were horrible. I'd just be a mess. I'd be crying. Most of the time, my dad would come in and love me, help me, anything else. But one night he came in, and he yelled at me. He was like, knock this off, blah, 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 right? And at that point, I turned away from my father. I cut him off. I rejected him. I was done. And what I actually realized through a very special grace this Lent was that's also the point where I rejected God. in my life. See, my father, while he wasn't always present, he was stable. But my father's mom left him when he was young. She was a drunk. She cheated on him, on my father, or my grandfather, and left. And so my father was only acting out of his own pain. He was watching the same kind of thing happen. My mom had affairs and left. His mom, same thing. But I didn't know that. A little kid doesn't know those kind of things. And I turned away from everything. From there, I started drinking, using drugs. By the time I was 12, I was 12 when I first got high, when I first got drunk. And from there, I did everything I could to be high and drunk as often as I could, which at that young of age wasn't all the time. You know, we raided every one of our friends' families' liquor cabinets. And so when that was done, we were had a little stretch of dryness, right? But by the time I was in late junior high and high school, I was high and drunk daily. And I don't know how I got out of high school. I just reapplied to a university the other week and they accepted me, and I had to go back and look through my transcripts, and oh my gosh, they were awful. I mean, bad, right? And I don't know how I got out. I really don't. Sometimes I wonder if they just didn't want me there anymore because I caused problems, right? Because when you're living that kind of life, you're not good, you're not nice, you're not serving others. And I hit a point in my life where everything was about me, period. It took me a long time to be able to say this, but I genuinely did not care about anybody but me. I did not care about you. I did not care what you thought. I did not care how I affected you. All I cared about was what you could do for me. Whether it was give me money, drugs, booze, sex, make me laugh, entertain me, give me a ride, whatever it was. Whatever you could do for me, that's what I wanted, and that was it. And I lived my life that way for a very long time. And I created a lot of wreckage doing so. I hurt a lot of people. First, my father, so much so that he died when I was 20 years old, and the last 2 years before he died, he didn't want anything to do with me anymore. And then I saw him 3 days before he died. He died on a Sunday. I got a call Thursday night. I went and saw him Friday, hung out with him alone Saturday, and at the end of that day, I told him I loved him, and he said, "I don't believe you." And that's how bad things got. My own father didn't believe that I loved him. Right? And for me, what that was I thought I was a piece of crap. Like, I knew it. And anybody in your life who lives that way, because we all know somebody like that. We know. We may not want to admit it. We may never admit it as long as we live, because that would require some level of humility. But we know. We know we're living horribly. We know we're affecting people, and we probably feel worse about it than you do. Right? But what he did that day when he said that was he gave a stamp of approval on all the lies that I believed in my head. That I was bad, that I was a problem, that I would never amount to anything, that I was worthless, that I shouldn't even be alive or any of that. All that was given its stamp of approval right there. And then my father had an inheritance that he left, and he left it all to my sister, which was smart. I wouldn't be here today had I got that much money. And it was no small amount of money. But one of the things I've had to root through in my life and look at is there's a reason throughout salvation history there is a blessing. A spiritual, personal blessing and a financial blessing. God blesses us. I'm not talking some health and wealth gospel, nothing like that. But it's both. And he withheld his blessing from me. What I had to come to terms with was the reason he withheld his blessing from me is because I rejected him. It's no different in our relationship with God. The only reason we go to hell is because we reject God. And he withholds his blessing of eternal life. Because when we reject somebody, we run away from them. My father spent years trying to get back into a relationship with me, trying to communicate with me, trying to build bridges. And I just, nope, couldn't let it go. I hated the man. hated him. So much so that when I was 15, I plotted to kill him. I told my sister about it. She said she'd disown me, so I didn't do anything with it. Thank God. Right? I hated the man. Hated him. I hated myself. I hated everybody. And my heart was hard, and it was rotten. And first time I tried to commit suicide was when I was 18, and then 19, and then 20, and then 21 again. Every other time, more and more serious. The last time, I took a knife to my throat and to my arms, which is why I have tattoos on my neck, partially. Partially it's to cover up the scars, partially it's because I wanted people to think I was scary. Which has its pluses and minuses today, right? Like I can go pretty much anywhere I want, nobody messes with me and my family. That's a blessing. On the other hand, several years ago, I'd go to at that time I was going to morning mass at 8:15 with the kids every morning at my parish. And because we have a 6:30 and then the 8:15. And I remember going to Hy-Vee one time and standing in the frozen food aisle, and this kid comes running up and stops about 5-6 feet away. He's like, Mommy, I see him in mass every day. And Mommy's like, get over here. Don't go near him. Right? So there's two sides to that coin. In the end, the reason I look the way I do is because I was living out of a lot of pain, and I was trying to project something else other than who I am. Right? So I rejected God, and I rejected my father, and my life got horrible. I could not manage to put together a day sober or clean. I could not maintain relationships to save my life. When I moved out of my house at 18, I moved in with a guy who it took me till last Lent to fully, openly admit that he was a Satan worshiper, and I was too for about a year. He did seances every night, channeling things. I did it once, freaked me out. That's when I departed and left, moved out, because something really happened, and it freaked me out, right? But there was times in there that God was reaching out to me. Times. My mother, even in her twistedness, would still pray for me constantly. My mother is the greatest witness of Jesus for me, because her life was an absolute mess. She was totally messed up. She ended up broke. She lives in Fort Collins now. Her mind's gone. She's got dementia. She doesn't remember anything. She's on state support. She's never had anything. She hurt me a lot, my sister a lot, but she always clung to Jesus. It drove me up the wall. I hated every moment of it when she did. She'd always be praying for me. I'd tell her all the heinous stuff I was doing just to make her mad. And she'd just keep praying for me over the phone right then and there. I'm just like, leave me alone. But she was there reaching out, doing exactly what Mary has done for me the last 12 years. Attempting to mother me as I rejected her. Right? So he's reached out to me several times, and I constantly would reject him. I don't want that. Or if it was seriously, like, obviously a God moment, it'd be like 5 minutes later, I'm like, yeah, that wasn't real. And walk away from it. Keep doing what I was doing. Eventually, I hit a point where life was unmanageable. I went to the mental hospital one too many times, and then I found myself in a 12-step program and decided that maybe I needed something, so I started reading philosophy. Couldn't do the whole God thing, right? And what's weird is the only thing up until I was 21 that I'd ever read, the only book I'd actually ever read was Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Otherwise, I got some Cliff Notes for like George and the Giant Peach when I was in 6th grade. I would sift through things in high school just to write enough to get a grade in literature class, English class. But I never actually read anything until then. So I'm in the Crisis Center in Lincoln, and I read John Sanford's Winter Prey. Read it in like a day, 300 or 400 pages. And then I got out from there and read Plato's Republic. It was weird. And then I started reading like Lysistrata and these other stories from ancient Greek and Roman and the Iliad and the Odyssey and all these other things, and it started to make me think, right? And I started to think more, realizing there's something other than me and what's going on in here, because I clearly can't live my life, right? But philosophy wasn't enough. I couldn't stay sober. I'd stay clean for a few years, and then I'd be off to the races again. And so then I decided, well, I need something spiritual, but of course it can't be God, so let's try Buddhism or New Age stuff. Let's try meditation, right? Which meditation was good in the sense that it took off the rough edges, because I was a very sharp personality at the time. I was not nice. I was barbed, right? And so it took off the edges. But it never actually changed me. Never changed me. And I realized that if something didn't fundamentally change, it was not going to be good. And that realization came when I wound up hooked on Oxycontin for about a year, year and a half. I'd always done lighter pain pills, but that was bad. It's like pharmaceutical grade heroin, basically. You know? And I was stuck on that for a long time. I got off of it, and I was so depressed and suicidal that I was ready to end it. And that was 12 years ago. Right about this time of year, 12 years ago. And I remember going to a 12-step meeting. I'm like, something doesn't work here tonight. This is it. I had everything ready, planned out. Boom, we're done tonight. I left early because everything was annoying me. The meeting was terrible. And then this guy was standing outside who had showed up late, and he was smoking a cigarette. He's like, hey, let's go talk at the coffee shop. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't want to talk anymore. Been talking to people for years, professionals that I've been put in front of, all these things. I don't want to talk, right? I just wanted the pain to end. And somehow he convinced me, so we went to the coffee shop, and he cornered me that my life was a mess. Duh. I knew that. I was there. Hook, line, and sinker, I was there. But then he looked at me at one point in this conversation. He's like, man, if you don't get God, you're going to die. And he had no idea. And so I have to get him off my butt, and half because I had no other options. He was like, hey, let's go say a prayer of surrender, right, outside, on our knees, in the parking lot. I'm like, all right, whatever. I really didn't have any other options. I knew where I was going. I was like, well, we'll see what happens. So I hit my knees in the parking lot with him and say a prayer of surrender. And it wasn't like the clouds opened or anything, but I felt motivated to do the next thing I had to do in that program. And so I was at Meadowlark Coffee, which is 17th and South, and there's a Walgreens across the street. So I got in my car, and I start driving around, and I'm halfway down the block in front of the grocery store to Walgreens. And up until this point, when I met him, all I could think about was using or dying. And as I'm driving, I realize I have no desire to use, I have no desire to die, and God is thick as pudding in my car. He was just there. It wasn't Jesus, it was just God. I mean, it was Jesus, but that's not what I knew it as. And that moment changed everything for me. And from that moment on, I strove to do everything I could to clean my life up, to make restitution to every person I'd ever harmed in my life. There's only one person I haven't found. One person who refused to let me speak with them, to make restitution for, to pay back things, apologize to, all that kind of stuff. And I sought to do those things, then started serving others, helping other people like me who were struggling and were hurting. And this man introduced to me what it really means to surrender, which is, well, Matt, you have your will and you have God's will. And when your will and God's will are in competition, you do his will. Period. He just broke it down that simply. I was like, okay, I can do that, I think. And so I started trying to do that. And my life started to get better and better and better. Eventually, I found my way at Lincoln Berean Church with him, which, funny, my cousin worked there for a number of years. My aunts and uncles go there and stuff. So I wound up at church there. And there I read a book called The Case for Christ and came to believe in Jesus. So I surrendered my life to Jesus because I couldn't argue anymore intellectually with the whole Jesus thing. Then from there, I met my now wife, who was a cradle Catholic, and I really hated Catholics. Above all, I did not like Catholics. I had no reason not to like Catholics because I didn't know any that I knew were Catholics for sure. I just thought Catholics were all mindless drones, sheeps that did what they're told, and they didn't think, which is totally opposite now, right? The great intellectual tradition in Catholicism. But that's what I thought, you know? And I was a person that hated authority. And if you don't like authority, the Catholic Church is kind of the whipping boy, right? Because we value obedience. We value authority. We value those things. And if you're from my diocese, we really value those things. A lot. And so I really didn't like Catholics. And so we got into an argument one night, and I'm like, hey, you know, and this is probably 3-6 months in dating, and I was like, hey, you know, if we're really going to go anywhere, you're going to have to stop being Catholic and come with me. And she wouldn't. She wouldn't budge. She couldn't defend her faith to save her life, but she would not budge. And this was the first woman that I could not manipulate to get to do what I wanted. The first. I always picked them that way. Right? I was manipulative. I was sick. But I could not manipulate her, and that struck me. And so I went to see her pastor, Father Johnson, and he was perfect for me. Because Father's laughing because he knows him. This priest is awesome. He walks the line of appropriate and inappropriate all the time and dances on both sides. He's great. Right? And for me at the time, he was perfect because I was not nice. And I went and met with him, and he just laughed and made jokes and answered my questions and didn't answer some and ignored some. And it was great. And so I started talking to him regularly. And then my wife was going on a mission trip with Wesleyan University to India to work with Tibetan refugees, and so I went along with her on that. And he said, hey, check out the Missionaries of Charity while you're there. And so we made our way to Calcutta and got to volunteer for a day with the Missionaries of Charity. And that's where everything changed for me. The only thing I could tell you when I got back was I saw Jesus. What I recognized after a number of years of spiritual direction is I was actually holding Jesus in my arm in a man who was dying. I was holding him in my arms. And see, I believed in Jesus at this point, but I was still broken on the inside. I was still messed up. I believed, but I was not okay. And everything this guy was on the outside, I was on the inside. And this love welled up in me. And it wasn't just for him, it was also for me. And it was like a Holy Spirit Hiroshima that just blew my life up. It blew my life up. You know, when I did the spiritual exercises, Father Hazing would talk about how our heart is the garden where we walk in intimacy with the Father, right? Just like Adam and Eve did in the garden. That's where we walk in intimacy with him. That's where he dwells. It's the center of our being, according to the Catechism. Beyond our psychic drives, it's where the will resides. It's a place we choose, and we walk with him there. And some of us have little paths. Some of us have streets, small buildings. Some of us have New York City. Right? And all of that has to be broken down, destroyed, and pulled out so that it can be tilled into a garden again. Well, there's kind of two ways God does this. He either does it piecemeal. He may, dredge up a street and then you help him pull it out. He may drop a building, you sift that one out, or he may just destroy the whole thing and give you rubble, which is what he did with me. And when I came home, everything was different. I had clear sight. I knew when I was sinning, and it was really, really uncomfortable. It didn't mean my habits were changed, but it meant it was clear. It was clear. I could not hide from it anymore. I could not delude myself, and that was horrible, absolutely horrible. And I cried for probably every day for 2 years, 2.5 years when I got back. And I didn't tell anybody because I didn't want them to think I was like my mom. Mentally ill, because it's not normal. And it took me even longer in spiritual direction, when I got into spiritual direction with a priest, to finally realize what was happening was I was healing. Because when you live that kind of lifestyle, what you're doing is you're putting everything in a box and pushing it away and never dealing with it, right? When I meet with people one-on-one, my favorite comment is, I've dealt with that. Because I'd say 90% of the time what that means is they put it in a hopefully toxic waste-proof container and put it away. And that's how they've dealt with it. The problem is none of those containers are leak-proof. And they leak out into our life. And if you think about that person you all know, maybe she's 80 or 90 or he, or maybe even not that old, but they're just nasty to be around. They're bitter. They complain all the time, and they're just, you get around them and you can't wait to get away. You know, that's because they do that. Just shove everything out. They don't deal with it. And so I spent a long time, a couple years, just with my heart broke open right there. Couldn't hide. I would try, and I couldn't. I couldn't hide from the pain and the discomfort. By grace, Father Johnson had just gotten a new 4-volume set of the Liturgy of the Hours. And I came back from Calcutta, and he's like, here, why don't you take these and learn how to pray? That's what the sisters prayed. I was like, okay, I'll try that. I was self-employed. I owned a tattoo studio at the time, so I could set my own schedule. And so I started praying all the hours, regularly, every day, 5. I had new convertitis, so sometimes I prayed all 7, right? But all 5 of the hours. And what would happen is for me, that was my school of prayer. The Psalms were my school of prayer. In the Psalter, what we see is the psalmists relating their hearts totally open. Hating and smiting people, to praising God and loving people, to begging for mercy and help, lamenting, all of it. The full breadth of human experience is in there. And that was my school of prayer right there. That, Eucharistic adoration, and Mass. That's where I learned to pray. And it was more out of necessity, because if I didn't do this, I was going to die. I knew that. That was the grace of being suicidal. Is I knew that if I didn't continue down this path, where exactly I'd end up. And so I stayed there, and I stayed in that place that was uncomfortable, that was painful, and just left it open to him. And I wept, and I begged for mercy, and I begged for grace. And I tried to be a decent human being in the process, which was really, really difficult. And in that process of several years, I created a lot of wreckage. I still hurt people because I had habits that needed to be unwound. I needed to learn what virtue was. And what I needed to learn about virtue, too, was that it wasn't just something I ardently strive for out of my own power. It's actually a fruit of communion. I can only grow in that virtue, really grow in that virtue and likeness of Christ, when it's driven by grace, when it's empowered by that grace. It's a fruit of that communion. And so I spent a lot of years doing that. And it was hard. Quite frankly, it sucked. There's just no other way around it. And that's the first hurdle of the interior life, is going through purgation in this place where all of our stuff comes out. Because what prayer is, according to Pope Benedict, my favorite definition, is pure receptivity to God's grace. It's pure receptivity. It's openness. It's vulnerability. Another word, listening. It's pure openness. See, we spend most of our time living somewhere like this, right? Closed off because of the experiences of life that we've had. Some of us have had really rough experiences. Some of us have been victimized. Victimized. There's at least one person in this room who has been, besides me. And it's hard. It's hard to be open and trust. But that's what he wants. Humility is the foundation of prayer, the Catechism says. It also says we're all beggars before God. And a beggar comes like this, just waiting to catch whatever they get, which is receptivity. It's this openness. But see, God doesn't expect us to go from here to right? Like in a day or a moment or even a year or 10 years or 20 years. He stands there waiting. He stands there waiting, open himself, waiting for us. Patiently. As uncomfortable as it is for him. When we turn away and run, or he reaches out and we slap his hand away, Because maybe we don't realize it's God. I didn't realize my dad was God. I didn't realize my mom was God. I didn't realize even at times my sister, as much as I don't want to admit it, was God reaching out to me. There were certain police officers, like the one who chose not to shoot me one night. The night I slit my throat, I was still holding the knife in my hand. I was surrounded by them, 5 or 6 of them with guns drawn on me. And I was thinking about taking a step because I knew all I had to do was take a step. And then bam, pepper spray. That sucks. Horribly. And he rode or followed us in the ambulance all the way back, and then he sat in the room with me all night. And with tears in his eyes, he said, "Thank you for not making me shoot you." So many times he reaches out, and we're just like, psh, 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 nothing. But his love is as such that he stays. He stays there. See, in the Missionaries of Charity chapels, next to the crucifix, it says, "I thirst." Because he thirsts for us. He longs for us. He longs. Thirsting is not just desire. If you're about to die, 2.5 days no liquid, like your thirst is bad. Like you'll do damn near anything to get a drink. You might hurt somebody to get a drink, right? He thirsts for us. What the Catechism says about prayer also is that prayer happens when his thirst and our thirst meet. They meet. Our longing collides and communion happens. And so as I'm in this place of pain and discomfort, what I didn't recognize at the time is I was right next to him, bouncing between being the good thief and the bad thief. But I was right next to him. Pain is a really important thing. Every religion tries to deal with pain. They try to answer it somehow. Some make believe it isn't real. Some say ignore it, don't be attached to anything, you'll never experience it. Our faith tells us reality is you will never avoid pain. Every person will go through pain in their life. There is no way around it, period. Some may have more, some may have less, but everybody will experience it. But our God is eternally in the midst of it. Eternally, he's right there. And praise God, he is, so fathers can make it present for us on the altar. We can partake of that. We can eat of that tree of life. It's eternally there, so they make it present for us. But he's in the midst of our pain. And so when we're in our pain, we can commune with him. Father Scott Traynor in South Dakota says, God will do 2 things with our pain if we're in relationship with him. If we relate it to him, either 1, he'll take it away and get rid of it. That's always the hope. Or 2, we will meet him in it in such a way that there's nowhere else we want to be, but with him in the midst of the pain. Because when we have communion with him, it all becomes relative. It's not that it doesn't hurt, but the deepest pain and suffering is loneliness. It's the loneliness. It's the isolation. That's why the person who's sick and hurting in the hospital, like the priests know this, anybody who's served anybody who's in a lot of pain, most of the time there really isn't anything you can actually say. And when you try to, it's like you got marbles in your mouth, unless it's a word from God or something. There's really nothing you can say. All you can really do is just be there with them. Just be there. But see, that's the healing. See, our sacraments aren't sprinkling pixie dust on us. They're not magic tricks. Jesus doesn't sprinkle pixie dust on us to heal us or any of that. He enters into our pain. He communes with us in it. It's relationship. He meets us in it. That's what heals us. Right? And so this prayer, what prayer is it's pure receptivity to God's grace. It's openness. It's a dialogue back and forth. Heart speaks to heart. Jesus has already given, rather the Father has already given us his heart. And his heart is that. That's his heart right there. The cross is his heart. His heart is always broken and always giving. The prodigal son, it's painfully longing for his child to return. And the minute he sees him repented, I can't imagine what the son must have felt. Like his dad's like barreling at him. And he thinks he's like, just should be maybe a servant or something. He wished his dad dead, took his money as inheritance, and then his dad's coming at him fast. Like, But all his dad wanted to do was fall on him and love him and kiss him and give him a robe and a ring and shoes and make him a son again. He was longing for that. That's the Father's heart. So what he wants for us, because this is all God's initiative first, is our response is to give our own heart back. In order to give our heart to God, we have to know what's in it. We have to know what's in it. We have to start becoming aware. Father Timothy Gallagher likes to talk about this awareness. We have to become aware of what's actually happening in us. Pay attention to it. These heinous little things will keep us from doing that. They're changing the face of the world. I work at this university in Bismarck, and I was talking to the president last time I was up there last month. And he's like, he's been there for 10 years, he's the president. And he's like, man, they're different now. I'm like, it's the phones. These kids have had phones for the last 10 years. Do we realize these things release dopamine when we look at them? So you look at this thing for 4 hours a day, not much different than drinking for 4 hours a day. Same problem. Escape, get a fix, escape. Many relationships are falling apart. They have 12-step meetings for these things on the coast now, right? Because they're destroying relationships, right? We have to become aware. We have to put things aside and start to become aware. Take ourselves seriously, our spiritual lives seriously. What's happening in me? And then tell him about it. Tell him about it. I hope everybody has this person. Do you have somebody that you can just be you with? Doesn't matter if you brushed your teeth. Doesn't matter how your hair looks, if you smell. Doesn't matter if you talk just right or not. You can just be who you are. That's who Jesus wants to be with us. Sometimes in our Catholic faith, because we have such a formal liturgical tradition, we get really uptight and rigid with our relationship with God. And we think we have to be like this all the time, everywhere we're at. Which is not the case. And I'm not saying there's not proper etiquette when you're in Mass and all those kind of formal situations. But interiorly, we should not be like that. We should not be afraid to step out of line. We should not be afraid to do anything. St. Augustine says, love God and do what you want. That's a real awkward statement for the rigid person. Love God and do what you want. Right? But we should have this familiarity. So when I think of God, sometimes I'll use my imagination, and I'm just sitting there talking to him. You know? He got his legs kicked up, and he's sitting at the table with me, and we're just talking. St. Ignatius talks about the imagination's a good thing to use. We can encounter God there. And so I tell him what's going on in my heart. And then just like any other conversation, I wait and listen to what he might have to say. I acknowledge what's happening in myself. I own the reality of what's happening in myself, good or bad. That's a big thing. One of the problems we get into is the things that are happening inside of us, the feelings, the thoughts, the desires that are unholy, we begin to think that's us. That's my identity. And that is a lie straight from the pit of hell. That is not our identity. God already said we are good and we're his children. And I imagine if you're here tonight, there's more than likely you want to be in that relationship, and you're trying to be, right? And so that's the truth. Doesn't mean we don't do bad things. I'm not sweeping onto the road. But that's who we are. We're his children. And so we have to recognize those things that are happening inside of us. Could be God, it could be us, or it could be Satan. Any of those things. And so he wants to see them. He wants to know them. But don't own everything that goes on in your head. One of the worst things to come out of modern psychology is, well, I'm doing this to myself. Everybody thinks they're doing this to themselves. No, everybody's not doing this to themselves. Some people believe lies, and Satan is right there chirping at them, telling you how much you suck and how horrible you are. And yes, it's them. They're real. It doesn't, and we're the ones who choose to believe it or not and act on it. But they're there. Read the screw tape letters sometime. It's a pretty good indicator of how all this works. So we acknowledge this stuff, we relate this stuff, and then we wait and receive what he has for us. Maybe he wants to speak a word into it. Maybe he just wants to be present. Maybe it's a time of battle and prayer, and you're just being stretched to be patient. Just to be patient, to be present. Right? But whatever we receive from him, we respond concretely in our lives. See, all the graces we get are not just for us. One of the Protestant issues that I have is it's not just about me and Jesus. It's about me and Jesus in the context of a community. Love God, love your neighbor. The two are permanently and inextricably bound together. You cannot separate them. If I say I love God but don't love my neighbor, I believe it's James says, I'm a liar. There's no truth in me. Maybe it's John. They're bound together. And so all the graces we receive are meant to be for the wider church. And so when God gives us grace, it's meant to be, we need meant to respond to it. Right? I'll give you a quick example and then I'll be quiet. So one day my wife, this is where it impacts the most my wife, right? That's the relationship that gets the most hammering. It's the most difficult because we actually know each other, right? We're always around each other. Well, not always, but enough. Right? And so one day, Sunday morning mass is the absolute, potentially most heinous time there is. The hour before mass, I think. Jeff Cavins said that once in a much nicer way. But I believe it's wholeheartedly true. The first time I heard it from him, I was like, oh my gosh. And I thought about the hour before Mass or the morning before Mass. There is inevitably either a fight or an opportunity for one, either between us or between the kids and us. One of the two. Somebody wants to divide us up. Why? Because Sunday Mass is the most important hour of the week. The most important hour of the week. Where we all come together before God and offer worship and praise and commune with him together. Right? And so this morning was going much like most mornings, except this time it was 95% her and 5% me. Right? Usually it's the other way, but this morning it was that way. And so we start to get into a little tiff. I'm getting irritated. And my go-to is I need to go to the bathroom. Right? And I head to the bathroom. I lock the door so nobody can get in. And I sit on the edge of the bathtub. And I'm sitting there going, okay, Jesus, like I'm pissed. I'm mad. I am mad. Please, just give me something here. Like I don't want Mass to go south. Because what would happen is we'd get into an argument. We'd go to Mass. We would sit with the kids between us. We wouldn't talk until we had to at the sign of peace, right? Then things would start to crack. And then it would take another 30 minutes after Mass before, or an hour or something, before we're finally smoothed out and like talking again, relating to each other. Didn't want to go through that. I had that still small voice that's like, hey, don't react, right? Pause. And so I went in there, like, come on, Jesus, what's going on? And this thought occurred to me. She had a friend in high school. She went to a small private school in Omaha, and the graduating class of like, I don't know, 20 or 30, something like that. And she's not very old. She's 34. 33. She'll be 34 in a minute. And one of her classmates died of cancer. And so the day before, they had all been up to Omaha, and they were all hanging out, kind of celebrating his life, da-da-da-da, whatever. And it occurred to me, I was like, I wonder if she's upset about that. Right? But I'm still mad too. And so I open the door, and I go out there, and I'm like white-knuckling it, just trying not to be that way. And I ask her, so how are you doing with this? Waterworks. She wasn't doing well. Right? The anger left me immediately, and I was able to be there. I was able to comfort her, give her a hug, hold her, talk for a few minutes. Then we went on our way and went to Mass. Praying this way has concrete impact on our lives, right? I acknowledged what was happening in me, that I was frustrated, that I was angry. I related it to God. I told him about it, and I asked for what I wanted, which was help. I just didn't want to ruin the morning. And the thought came to me to ask her about that. And I listened for once. I can't tell you how many times the Holy Spirit gives me little comments like that, and I'm just like, yeah, whatever. You know, just do my own thing anyway. Or maybe even I know it's him, and I'm like, yeah, no thanks. Right? But I listened. I listened to what he gave me, and I responded concretely in my life. And not only did we not just get into a fight that made Mass awkward and our kids awkward and everything else. Instead, what God did was he shot us way beyond par. And he gave us a moment of communion and intimacy where I was able to be a husband, as Ephesians 5 says, be as Christ is to his church. In my own frustration and anger, in this question I asked her, I think Jesus in me was saying, forgive her, Father. She doesn't know what she's doing. I asked her this question, and then I was able to lay down my life for her. And grace was poured out. Right? And it was another moment where I received healing also. Because, see, I didn't have anybody in my life showing me what that was like. And so when I got married, I was freaked out. I was like 99% sure God wanted me married, and I was about 70% sure I wanted to be married. It didn't have anything to do with her. It had mostly to do with me. I was the same that I was supposed to have kids. I was about 30% sure I wanted kids. Not because I don't like my kids, I love my children, but because I didn't think I could do it. And so all this healing comes about just from this one moment of prayer. It's another moment, another lived experience of, see, Matt, you don't suck totally. You can do some things, right? And so what I hope you get from this tonight is a couple things. Is one, God wants to change you. If somebody would have told me 12 years ago that A, I'd be Catholic, I probably would have slapped them. If they told me I really like being Catholic, that would have blown me away. If they would have told me I actually worked for the church, I would have said no way. If they told me that somebody would actually find what I have to say valuable enough to allow me to talk to people, that would totally blow me away. No way. Nobody wanted anything to do with me. Nobody. I could not feed myself, clothe myself, or take care of myself at one point in my life. But that's the grace of God. He truly changes us and transfigures us. And the way he does it is through this relationship, which is our prayer. And the key to it is to be real with him, to be open, to be vulnerable, to be real and authentic. Just be who we are. Not who I want to be, not who I think I should be, not who I used to be, but who I am right here, right now. Happy, mad, sad, joyful, peaceful, whatever it is. Come to him just as we are. And he will meet us right there. He will meet us there. He's always there waiting. Don't ever think that consolation or desolation is the determination on whether you're praying fruitfully, because it's not. All those are the perceived indicators of his presence. Perceived indicators. He's always present. He's everywhere present, and he fills all things, according to a Byzantine prayer. He's always there. And the consolation and desolation is just whether we experience that or not. The way we know we're growing in prayer is if we're growing in charity. Selfless giving, love. An easy way to determine love is patient, love is kind, and love rejoices in the right, according to 1 Corinthians 13. Those are all three the positives. Bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Those are all descriptives of patience. That's how we know if we're deepening in prayer. Am I more patient with people? Am I more kind? Do I see the good in them? Or do I see the poison in the bad? Because the more we grow into Jesus' likeness, the more we relate our thoughts, feelings, and desires to him in this way, what happens is the more we receive his thoughts, feelings, and desires, the more we're purified. And in the end, we end up manifesting into the world. And we end up doing what John 5:19 says. Jesus says in John 5:19, I only do what I see the Father doing. Another part of John, he also says, apart from me, you can do nothing. So we stay attached to him. If we want to do his will, relate your thoughts to him. Because you know what? You'll start thinking like he thinks. You'll start feeling like he feels about things. You'll start desiring what he desires. And next thing you know, be Mother Teresa walking down the street. And people will be like, Jesus, is that you? Right? Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. All right. All right, I got some questions here. First one I'll go with is, what advice do you have for someone considering joining the Catholic Church? Don't think you need to understand the entirety of the Catholic faith, because it takes a lifetime, for one. The Catholic faith is a beautiful, huge mosaic. And for me, what I knew for sure is that Jesus was in the Eucharist and the sacraments were real. That's primarily what I knew. I was 100% convinced of that. Right? There's other things I knew and I believed too, but a lot of the rest of it I took on faith because I wouldn't have enough time to understand it all. And I'm still 10 years, this Easter will be my 10 years I've been Catholic. And there's still stuff I'm trying to understand that I don't get, right? So don't think you need to understand everything. And two, take the leap of faith. I would say take the leap of faith. Because until you enter the sacramental life of the church, you just don't understand. It's something completely different. I will never forget my first confession. My first confession, I went to Father, and I had done, in the 12-step program, I'd done 5th steps before, which is basically you tell somebody everything. Like, there is no skeleton in my closet anymore. Somebody knows everything. And I have to live that way personally. But I'd already done that, so I'm like, what's confession? You know? So I go to confession, and I told Father everything I could come up with. And there were those big skeletons primarily, and then some other stuff. But when and he said, as far as the east is from the west, I absolve you of your sins, blah, 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 quoting the psalm. And I remember leaving and getting in my car and driving. And what was different was when I thought about those things, they didn't have hooks in me anymore. I was actually free of them. Previously, when I'd think about them, it'd still be like, oh, guilt and shame and those kind of things, but that was all gone. So then I think I went to confession like 2 more times before I became Catholic, because I literally went and like tried to come up with everything I could possibly think of that I ever did. And then my first communion that Easter was amazing. It reminded me at that time I left the civic auditorium and there was total peace, total joy, and I was totally happy. And I couldn't wait to come back the next morning, and the next morning, and the next morning, right? And today that's the central point of my life, is the Eucharist. So I'd say, take a leap of faith, jump into it. How do we 20s and 30s help someone who is in a life like I was in? Be present. Don't think you need to call them on every sin they do and that kind of stuff. Be present. That's probably the biggest thing. See, because holy people tend to run away. I don't mean like really holy people, but I mean like church people tend to get around stuff like that. It's like, ooh, right? And one of the things we need to understand is that Jesus never did that to us, thank God. He was never concerned about getting dirty by our sin. That's one of the reasons the Jews didn't like him too well, is because he touched lepers. But he was so clean that when he touched them, they got clean. He didn't get dirty, they got clean. The same Jesus lives in each one of us. He said we'd do greater things than what he ever did. So when we touch people, they should get clean too. If we live that life of intimacy like I was talking about, then we'll be okay interacting with other people. There's a story of 2 bishops in the East, I think in Constantinople, and they come out of the Hagia Sophia, and there's so many variations of this story. It's the one I heard. They come out of the Hagia Sophia, and a harlot rides by on a horse, and one bishop's like, "Oh my God, I can't look." And the other one's like, "Wow, that's a beautiful woman." We have to recognize where we're at in our spiritual life. For the one, it was appropriate for him to look away and not interact because he was easily tempted. The other one, on the other hand, was spiritually advanced. And he could see the good, he could see the beauty. He didn't get taken up by the lust, right? So we need to focus on that intimacy and be present to people. Just be present, as long as we can. Maybe that's 5 minutes. I learned my lesson the hard way. A buddy of mine, he was the first Catholic I brought back to the church. He came from a hard-living, hard-drinking Irish Catholic family. And he was a drunk and a drug addict, and a cloud of drama followed him everywhere he went. And it was difficult at times. And I finally hit a point where I was like, I just can't do this anymore. And I basically clipped him. I saw him at noon mass, maybe a year later, and he just looked wrecked and tired, like just beat up by life. And then a month later, I got a call that he overdosed and died. And I got to read at his funeral, which was awesome, but it was very difficult. And what I recognized in that, the problem wasn't him, the problem was me. Because when we interact with people like that, it stirs things up in us. And what I failed to do was relate my heart to God fully, so that I could be a resting place for this man, a bridge for this man to meet Jesus. Right? And so I've never thought that I could have saved him or anything else. Like, who knows? But that year, I could have been the face of Jesus in his life if I just would have dealt with what was happening in me, what he was stirring in me. Right? And so now, to this day, I don't clip people. I may distance myself periodically. And where I used to spend an hour with somebody, I may spend 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes for my own good, health, and sanity. But I will never completely clip somebody again. So I'd say be present. You attempted to commit suicide 4 times. Was there anything specific that someone said or did that helped you realize you needed help? Opened up your heart to change. The police had guns on me. That was what did it. When I was in the crisis center, there was 2 guys who came up from a 12-step program, and I had staples in my throat. And one of the guys would joke with me and call me Frankenstein, right? And these guys sat there with me for an hour. I was the only person that went in for this meeting that night. I talked, and then they talked. And I realized, oh my gosh, these guys are like me, but they're not anymore. And that was really the beginning of it. They were just there with me. They shared their heart, I shared my heart, and we just connected. Heart speaks to heart. They were transparent and open with me. And they aren't the type of people who are just going to like walk into a crowded room and be like, I did all this with my life, for no purpose. But there is a purpose to all that suffering, right? And we should be willing to share it with others if it might be useful or helpful. Sometimes when people are in pain and we share our own pain, either that we've gone through or we're currently in, it's just enough that they're not alone. They know they're not alone. Because most of us think that. When we're knee-deep in it, we think we're the only ones. And we think nobody cares, and we're all alone, and we're isolated. It's that loneliness again. So it was the guns and the vulnerability. How weird is that? How does your past affect your decisions as a parent? Are you able to evangelize through tattoos? I'll start with the second one first. That's easier to answer. Evangelizing through tattoos, yes. It's funny. I don't fit anywhere perfectly. Inevitably, when I speak at groups, somebody usually comes up to me and says, I'm really sorry because when you came, I was like, seriously? Or they were judging me somehow or something, right? It happens in church. But then in the other world, it's like, hey, what's going on? And then I open my mouth and they're like, Like it's just awkward everywhere I go now. At some level. But evangelization does happen. It is a bridge. Like some people will talk to me, or I'm able to speak with people that other people, that Father wouldn't be able to, right? Because they'd look at his collar and be like, yeah, whatever, and run, but I have an in there. And so anything that can build a bridge, common ground of any kind can work and to help facilitate evangelization. How does my past affect my decisions as a parent? Oh, good Lord. In many, many ways. There's a lot of my past I have to overcome to be a decent parent. Impatience. My dad was very authoritarian, and so my tendency would be to that end. One of the graces of my past is that I didn't have anybody to father me, and so God chose to father me, which he'll do that for you. Just like Ignatius says, God taught him as a schoolmaster teaches a schoolboy. That's how he wants to teach each one of us. And so the only reason I'm able to parent is because of that. And I'd say also because of Father Johnson and because of some other men in my life who have demonstrated to me what a father actually is and what a man is. Some priests, some laymen. Those three things are a huge grace of my past. I have really good people that are teaching me how to parent. On the other hand, it also, I have a lot more patience with my kids than my old man did with me. I stay present where my mom did not. And so there's a lot of things I'm deeply allergic to and don't do with my children that my dad did. And so, yeah, I'm really attentive with it, I think. I'm very attentive with what I say, how I say things, and what I do. In Unbound, it's really awkward because I hear stuff every day that parents said that still affect them, 35 years later, or in spiritual direction or whatever it is. And then I go home and I catch the same bleh coming out of my mouth. Makes it super awkward. So actually the work that I do feeds my vocation a lot. a lot. There's a lot of grace moving through that. So in the minute, it forces me to stay on track. Because I'm hearing it over here, I'm seeing the pain over here, and then I don't want to cause it over here, right? So I'd say my past affects my decisions very well, actually, because there's so much grace surrounding that, now. And God's grace is really protecting my children. My children are good. It amazes me. I look at my wife and I'm like, we are just not that cute. And they're adorable. They're nice. They're awesome. My wife has a similar past to me, and so sometimes she'll freak out and be like, oh my God, they're going to do what we did. And sitting there saying they're not in the same situation we were. They have two parents who love them, who are faithful, who are present, so they have a lot better chance. When did you realize you were experienced enough healing to enter your vocation? Wow. That would assume I discern my vocation properly. Right? So I work with college students, and almost all of them are discerning their vocation. And two things come to mind. Is one, when a person is able to give of themselves, they're probably ready to be in a vocation. Because the vocation is not primarily about them. It's primarily about gifting yourself to the other, one to the other. In the sacrament of marriage, it's affected by two people giving themselves one to the other, right? Selfless giving. And so when somebody is ready to lay down their life for the other person and serve the other person and give to the other person, they're probably ready. Now, that being said, we are in various points on the spectrum of ability and willingness to do that, right? So that's where having your, the person who's preparing you is really important, to help discern those things. But if it's all about me, and I'm really concerned about me and what I'm going to get out of it and everything else, then I might need some more time. On the other hand, this whole notion of being perfect before we get into marriage is really kind of a mistaken notion too, because the marriage is the pathway to holiness. It's the pathway to perfection, right? It's the path to it. That's what our vocation is. So for Father, it's via the priesthood. That's the pathway to holiness, the pathway to Jesus, right? How he lays down his life for his bride, his children, and those things. So I think if we're able to give, and we're able to really give, then I think it's okay. On a broad scale, that's about all I can say about that. But yeah, as we're walking the path of marriage, that's where the sanctification really happens. Remember, it's for the good of the spouses and the procreation, education of children. Right? It's not all about the kids. It's actually mostly about this. The kids are the fruit of the communion. Somebody told me once a long time ago, and I swear by this, they said when it becomes all about the kids, it becomes a daycare. Right? Because it's not. It's not all about them. It's the good of the spouses. These two are meant to be holy. And the thing is, the part of the problem we're in our culture today is because it's all about the dang kids. And they think it's all about them. And everything revolves around them. And they have helicopter parents, so they can't even interview for a job without mom calling and saying, this kid needs a job. My sister works for HR for State Farm, and she was telling me once, this kid failed a test, didn't get his job, and he was petrified when he heard this, but his mom called and was like, he is smart, he needs a job, blah, 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 right? And the kid was appalled. He was totally appalled when he heard that, But it's not all about the kids, it's about the parents. Because the thing that we don't realize in marriage, and the reason the giving is so important, is because it's not just what we do with them, it's what they see and encounter. So when they see and encounter two parents selflessly giving to one another, focusing on one another, their love, their attention, their time, meeting each other's needs, that is so formational. So formational. Because if they're doing that, the other one's going to naturally follow. And I'm not talking about the selfish, well, we're going to go hang out and spend our time together. That's not what I'm talking about. But if they're really focused on each other, giving to one another, loving to one another, the fruit of that is not only going to be new life, but it's also going to be the taking care of that new life. And so I think we need to refocus on that again. Loving the spouse. It was like yesterday, I came home and my wife gave me a hug in the kitchen. We were hugging in the kitchen. And always, whenever we hug, one of the kids is right in there. They want to be right in the middle of it. Because they naturally want communion. Right? They want to be right there. And then Nora, our 18-month-old, loves nothing more than be literally sandwiched right between us as we hug. Right? She just giggles and laughs and loves it. So if you can give yourself to the other one, you might be ready to get married. But I think that's all the questions I have.